It was a quiet, unassuming neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone waved hello and borrowed sugar without hesitation. A sanctuary for families, retirees, and young professionals alike. But the tranquility masked a far darker undercurrent. Beneath the surface of its perfectly trimmed lawns and freshly painted fences, secrets festered. And for one family, their dream home would become a prison of unimaginable terror. It began on a late spring evening when Jennifer moved into Maple Grove with her 8-year-old daughter, Lily. As they unloaded boxes from the moving truck, their neighbor, Mr. Charles Harding, approached. A man in his late 50s with an ever-present smile and a friendly demeanor, Charles exuded warmth. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, handing Jennifer a plate of freshly baked cookies. Jennifer, tired but eager to make a good impression, smiled back. "Thank you. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Harding. Call me Charles," he insisted. He crouched to meet Lily's gaze. "And you must be Lily. I hope you like it here." Lily nodded shyly, clutching her mother's hand. Charles's eyes lingered for a fraction longer than seemed normal, but Jennifer brushed it off as harmless enthusiasm. After all, wasn't it refreshing to meet someone so neighborly? Days turned into weeks, and Charles became a fixture in their lives. He'd stop by unannounced, always with a reason, delivering mail accidentally left in his box, dropping off flowers from his garden, or offering to fix a squeaky door hinge. Jennifer appreciated his helpfulness, though she couldn't shake a subtle unease she felt in his presence. One evening, as Jennifer tucked Lily into bed, her daughter whispered, "Mommy, I think Charles watches us." Jennifer froze. "What do you mean?" "Sweetheart." Lily pointed to her window. "Sometimes I see him in the backyard, just standing there." Jennifer dismissed it as her daughter's active imagination. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A month later, Jennifer began noticing small but unsettling occurrences. Doors she was sure she had locked would be ajar in the morning. Items in her home seemed to move on their own. A framed photo of her and Lily disappeared from the mantel, only to reappear days later in an entirely different room. She shared her concerns with her coworker, Angela, over lunch. "You think I'm losing it?" Jennifer asked. Angela's brow furrowed. "Maybe it's nothing, but trust your instincts. And keep an eye on that Charles guy. Something about him feels off." Jennifer's unease grew when she noticed her Wi-Fi was sluggish. A quick check revealed multiple devices connected to her network, devices she didn't recognize. Alarmed, she changed her password and installed a security camera in the backyard. The footage revealed nothing out of the ordinary for several nights. But on the 6th night, Jennifer's heart sank as she watched the playback. At 2:37 a.m., a figure emerged from the shadows of her backyard. It was Charles. He stood motionless, staring at the house for nearly 20 minutes before disappearing back into the darkness. Unable to shake the horror of the footage, Jennifer contacted the police. But without evidence of a crime, there was little they could do. "Install more cameras," the officer advised, "and call us if anything escalates." Determined to protect her daughter, Jennifer decided to inspect the house more thoroughly. While examining the basement, she noticed a draft coming from behind an old shelving unit. With effort, she pushed it aside, revealing a narrow passageway. Her stomach churned as she followed the tunnel, which led directly to the house next door, Charles's house. She stumbled back, her breath shallow. Inside the passageway were items unmistakably hers. Lily's stuffed animal, a pair of Jennifer's earrings, even a piece of mail she thought had been lost. It was undeniable proof that Charles had been in her home. Jennifer didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she sent Lily to stay with a friend. Then she called the police again, demanding they investigate. They assured her they'd send an officer, but hours passed with no response. As night fell, Jennifer's anxiety reached a fever pitch. She double-checked every lock and window before retreating to her bedroom. But as she turned off the light, she heard a creak. Her blood ran cold. Someone was inside the house. Grabbing her phone, she dialed 911. "There's someone in my home," she whispered. "Stay on the line," the operator urged. Jennifer hid in her closet, clutching a baseball bat. Her breath was shallow, her hands trembling. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. The closet door creaked open, and there he was, Charles, his face twisted in a grotesque grin. Jennifer swung the bat with all her might, catching him off guard. He staggered, and she bolted past him, running for the front door. Blue and red lights flooded the street as the police finally arrived. Charles was apprehended, his dark obsession finally exposed. There's an unspoken promise when you book a vacation rental. A place to escape, recharge, and forget the stress of daily life. But for Sarah and Daniel, their idyllic getaway would turn into a waking nightmare. The quaint cabin in the woods they'd chosen for their romantic retreat harbored secrets they couldn't have imagined. And once those secrets surfaced, there would be no turning back. It was supposed to be a weekend to remember. Sarah and Daniel arrived at the secluded cabin just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense trees. The rental listing had boasted of modern amenities and breathtaking views, but the reality felt different. The cabin was older, with peeling paint and windows that rattled in the evening breeze. Still, it had its charm, and Sarah convinced herself it was just rustic. Inside, the decor was a mix of cozy and unsettling. A fireplace dominated the living room, and above it hung an old, faded portrait of a man with hollow eyes. "That's creepy," Daniel joked, but Sarah didn't laugh. The cabin's silence felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. As they unpacked, they noticed odd details. Scratches on the wooden floor, a faint metallic smell, and a locked door at the end of the hallway. Sarah tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She shrugged it off. "Probably just a storage closet," she said. That night, the couple settled in with wine and a board game. The unease they'd felt earlier began to fade, replaced by laughter and the warmth of the fire. But as they prepared for bed, Sarah glanced out the window and froze. "Daniel," she whispered, "I think someone's out there." Daniel looked, but saw nothing. "It's probably just a deer," he reassured her. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The next morning, Daniel went for a hike while Sarah stayed behind to read. Alone in the cabin, she couldn't stop thinking about the locked door. Curiosity gnawed at her until she finally decided to investigate. Using a hairpin, she managed to pick the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small, windowless room. The smell hit her first, an acrid, metallic stench. Then she saw the walls, covered in faded newspaper clippings and Polaroid photos. Some articles detailed missing persons cases. Others were obituaries. The photos were worse. Images of people, all posed unnaturally, their eyes wide with fear. In the center of the room was an old wooden chair, its arms stained dark with something Sarah didn't want to identify. She stumbled back, her heart racing. As she turned to leave, she knocked over a small box. Out spilled more photos, and one of them was of her and Daniel, taken the night before through the cabin's window. When Daniel returned, Sarah showed him the room. He tried to stay calm, but his face betrayed his fear. "We're leaving now," he said. But as they packed, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch. Daniel grabbed a kitchen knife and motioned for Sarah to stay behind him. The door creaked open, and an older man stepped inside. He was gaunt, with sunken eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. "I'm the caretaker," he said, his voice raspy. "Saw your car and wanted to check in." Daniel didn't lower the knife. "We're leaving," he said firmly. The man's smile widened. "Oh, I don't think so," he replied. And with that, the lights went out. In the pitch darkness, chaos erupted. Sarah screamed as she felt hands grab her, but Daniel fought back, slashing at the dark. A lantern was knocked over, its flame casting eerie shadows as the couple struggled against their unseen attackers. Somehow, they managed to overpower the caretaker and flee into the woods. The trees were dense, and every snap of a twig sent their hearts racing. They could hear voices behind them, the caretaker and others calling out, taunting them. After what felt like hours, they stumbled upon a ranger station. Bursting inside, they locked the door and called for help. The rangers arrived quickly and searched the area, but the cabin was empty. The hidden room, the photos, even the caretaker, all gone, as if they'd never been there. Sarah and Daniel never returned to the woods, but the experience haunted them. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would wake up, certain she could hear faint whispers outside their window. Small towns often carry an air of mystery, places where everyone knows each other and where the pace of life seems unshakably steady. But in the case of Black Hollow, a sleepy town hidden deep in the Appalachian Mountains, familiarity bred something far more insidious. Beneath the facade of warm smiles and local charm lay secrets so terrifying that those who stumbled upon them rarely lived to tell the tale. It was a chilly autumn morning when Samantha Blake rolled into Black Hollow. The town's main street was lined with weathered buildings that had clearly seen better days, their faded signs bearing names like Hollow Diner and Mason's Hardware. Samantha, a seasoned journalist known for her investigative grit, was here to follow up on whispers of strange disappearances. Locals had reported that over the past decade, a dozen people had vanished without a trace. Families torn apart, hikers who never returned, and even some longtime residents gone, leaving no clues behind. Samantha's editor had dismissed the story as small-town paranoia, but Samantha's instincts told her there was more to it. Her first stop was the diner, where she ordered coffee and struck up a conversation with the waitress, an older woman named Clara. "You're not from around here, are you?" Clara asked, her tone cautious. "No, just passing through," Samantha lied. "Heard about some of the disappearances. Must be hard on the community." Clara's expression hardened. She glanced around before leaning in. "We don't talk about that," she said in a low voice. "It's not safe." Samantha pressed on, but Clara refused to say more. As Samantha left the diner, she noticed a man in a truck across the street watching her. His piercing stare followed her as she walked back to her car, sending a chill down her spine. Determined to uncover the truth, Samantha decided to dig deeper. She visited the local library, where she unearthed decades-old newspaper articles about unexplained disappearances. Strangely, all records seemed to abruptly stop 10 years ago. It was as if someone had intentionally erased the town's recent history. Later that day, she explored the outskirts of Black Hollow. She'd heard rumors about a remote area called Ravenwood, a dense forest that locals avoided at all costs. According to whispers, it was the last known location of several missing hikers. Samantha parked her car at the edge of the forest and ventured in. The air grew colder as she went deeper, and an eerie silence enveloped her. After an hour of walking, she stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. The tents were torn, belongings scattered, and a strong smell of decay lingered in the air. Her heart raced as she found a notebook among the debris. Flipping through its pages, she discovered chilling entries. "They're watching me," one read. "The woods are alive," said another. The final entry simply read, "If anyone finds this, run." Suddenly, the sound of snapping twigs echoed nearby. Samantha froze, clutching the notebook. She scanned the woods but saw nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched was undeniable. She turned and ran, her breath coming in gasps as the trees seemed to close in around her. Back at her motel, Samantha pored over the notebook and the photos she'd taken at the campsite. The pieces began to form a disturbing picture. The disappearances weren't random. They were connected to something organized, deliberate. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the truck and others in the town were involved. She decided to confront the sheriff, a grizzled man named Roy Jenkins. At first, he dismissed her questions, claiming the disappearances were nothing more than tragic accidents. But when she mentioned Ravenwood, his demeanor shifted. "Stay away from there," he said, his voice low. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Later that night, Samantha's curiosity got the better of her. Armed with a flashlight and a voice recorder, she returned to Ravenwood. This time, she followed a faint trail she'd missed earlier. It led to a clearing where she found an ancient stone altar surrounded by strange symbols carved into the ground. Candles, some still burning, were arranged in a circle. Before she could process what she was seeing, she heard voices. Hiding behind a tree, she watched as hooded figures emerged from the shadows, chanting in a guttural language. They surrounded the altar, and Samantha's blood ran cold as she saw what they carried: a young woman, bound and gagged. Samantha's instincts screamed at her to flee, but she couldn't leave without proof. She snapped photos from her hiding spot, her hands trembling. Suddenly, one of the figures looked directly at her, as if sensing her presence. Samantha's heart pounded as she slowly backed away, but a branch snapped underfoot. The chanting stopped. "She's here," a voice hissed. Panic set in as Samantha sprinted through the forest, the cultist shouts echoing behind her. The woods seemed endless, every path leading deeper into darkness. She could hear them gaining on her, their footsteps growing louder. Just when she thought she couldn't run any further, she saw a faint light in the distance. It was the ranger station she'd passed earlier. Summoning every ounce of strength, she raced toward it, bursting through the door and locking it behind her. Inside, she found a landline and called the state police. Her voice shook as she described what she'd seen. The rangers, skeptical but alarmed by her desperation, stayed with her until the authorities arrived. When the police searched the clearing the next day, the altar and symbols were gone. The ground looked undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. But Samantha's photos proved otherwise. Despite her evidence, the story was quietly buried. No arrests were made, and the disappearances continued. Samantha left Black Hollow, but the events haunted her. She knew the cult was still out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for their next victim. And every so often, when she looked out her window late at night, she swore she could see hooded figures standing just beyond the tree line, watching.